Every year in the summer, millions of tourists come to Croatia. They visit its coast, its islands, its old Mediterranean towns. Few realize the weight of Croatia's recent tragic history and the debates inside the country about how to deal with it today.
If somebody asks me what is in your life, first in the place of everything, I will tell Croatia. Not family, not anything else. I think it's my country.
These people even they are fantastic people, you know. Beautiful people, talented people, good people, with a lot of emotions. And in peaceful times, you know, they will give you, as we used to say, blood if you ask them, everything. Suddenly, when this dark curtain comes over their eyes, covering their eyes, some of them becoming wild animals.
And I think if you want a clean start, you have to face things that were good, but also the things that were wrong and were bad. And I strongly believe that there is no national interest and no national position that you defend with concentration camps.
In December 1999, 100,000 people lined the streets of Zagreb. They paid their last respect to Franjo Tudjman, the first president of independent Croatia. Tudjman had lost his battle with cancer. He had ruled Croatia for almost a decade. The film director Jakov Sedlar was an ally of Franjo Tudjman and made a feature film about his life.
Thanks God for Tudjman, because fortunately, after 1,000 years, Croatia reappeared in the map of Europe. Only because of him. But at that time, I'm telling you, he showed to our enemies around us that in some bad circumstances, God will always take somebody from those 5 or 6 million people and say he is a leader, and he will show and follow him. This is right way.
Novog republičkog predsjedništva na čijem je čelu dr. Franjo Tudjman. Pred saborom okupljeni građani već su od podneva očekivali.
In 1989, Tudjman created his political party, the Croatian Democratic Union, or HDZ. HDZ won the first free parliamentary elections. Tudjman became president of Croatia, then still part of socialist Yugoslavia. However, the Yugoslav Federation was in deep crisis. Slobodan Milosevic was the new strongman in Serbia, trying to take control of the whole of Yugoslavia. For this, he hoped to use Serb minorities in other parts of Yugoslavia. In Croatia at the time, 10% of the population were Serbs. In the summer of 1991, Croatia declared its independence. The Yugoslav army and Serb paramilitaries, backed by Milosevic, launched an offensive. Dubrovnik was bombed. The city of Vukovar destroyed. Serb fighters conquered almost a third of Croatia's territory and expelled all Croats who lived there. 4 years later, the Croatian army struck back. In August of 1995, Tudjman's generals reconquered most of the lost territory in just a few days. The operation was called Operation Storm.
Euphoria
društvu u cijeloj Hrvatskoj bila je nezapamćena. Vojnici su stilizirani kao heroji nacije. Cijeli politički vrh je na neki način doživio svoj i osobni trijumf, da tako kažem, i kolektivni trijumf. Mislim da u tim vremenima su ljudi doista iskreno to doživjeli.
The journalist Nenad Ivanković is an admirer of Franjo Tudjman. He wrote many books about the late president and his generals.
Danas to nije u postmodernističkom svijetu lijepo za reći, ali je to cijela povijest sazdana na tome. Državnik koji dobije rat i stvori državu, od tog većeg dijela nema.
Tudjman and his generals celebrated, but not for very long.
I think they thought that if you are doing a legitimate war, you must not consider if crimes are committed, war crimes or crimes against humanity. It is a collateral damage, collateral damage. So that is the reason why they are thinking on that. But that is why the International Tribunal was created. That a war is not a permission of the commission of crimes.
The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, or ICTY, had been created in The Hague in 1993 with Croatia's support. It was the first time since Nuremberg after World War II that leaders could be put on trial for crimes against humanity. The tribunal investigated crimes committed by Serb forces during the wars in Croatia and Bosnia. However, after 1995, prosecutors also looked into the violence committed against Serb civilians during Operation Storm. Prosecutors suspected that murders and intimidations of Serb civilians during Operation Storm were not isolated incidents, but the result of a policy to ethnically cleanse these parts of Croatia of their Serb population. A criminal conspiracy planned and implemented by Croatia's leaders. In late 1998, Tudjman addressed his generals in a televised address. He was bitter and worried.
Moram vam kazati, i sad se u Hagu pripremaju optužbe za vas, za nas sve. Ima i na spisku 5-6 generala iz Hrvatske, ne samo iz Bosne i Hercegovine. Prema tome i sa tog stanovišta nam treba jedinstvo vojske, nikakvo odstupanje od državne politike i jedinstvo vojske i naroda. Jer samo u tom slučaju, ako to očuvamo, moći ćemo kazati, gospodo, ne.
Regarding Hague, I think Tudjman was very naive. He couldn't believe that one day he will be accused for war criminal in Knin.
Tudjman's regime was using a very backward formula, return to Europe, but we don't have to adapt to Europe. Europe has to adapt to us, because we were always at the forefront of European defense against the Turks.
Hrvatskog ratnog zrakoplovstva svome vrhovniku.
Tudjman's refusal to cooperate with the International Tribunal left Croatia isolated. No Western president or prime minister came to his funeral. For his supporters, he was a heroic father of the nation. For prosecutors in The Hague, he was a suspect of serious war crimes. As his Croatia bade farewell to Tudjman in 1999, nobody knew which direction the country would take and how he would be remembered. In January 2000, the Croats elected a new parliament. The party created by Tudjman, the HDZ, lost control. A new government promised to lead Croatia out of its isolation. This meant full cooperation with the Tribunal in The Hague.
Nakon 2000. godine, a to je interesantno, prvi akt Sabora je bio da se Oluja i Bljesak stave pod ingerenciju haške istrage i tako dalje, i tada kreće cijela ta priča.
Croats also elected a new president, Stipe Mesić. In the eyes of Tudjman's supporters, Mesić was a traitor. He had criticized Tudjman's policies in Bosnia. He'd even gone to The Hague to testify as a witness. To his voters, Mesić promised a new beginning, the end of isolation.
Václav Havel, predsjednika Clintona, Joška Fischer, vicekancelar.
Jedan cilj je bio suradnja u regiji. Drugi cilj je bio izlazak iz izolacije, a treći cilj je bio priznanje, ulazak u sve međunarodne institucije, a prije svega trebalo je Hrvatsku orijentirati na ostvarivanje eurostandarda, na ispunjavanje uvjeta koje postavlja Evropska unija i ulazak u Evropsku uniju. Smatrao sam da je evropsko udruživanje milenijski pothvat kojeg ova generacija mora ostvariti.
There was one immediate problem. The new Croatian government and the new president did not control the Croatian military or intelligence services. There, many remained loyal to the legacy of Franjo Tudjman.
I remember very well because we were sitting in the president room, and he told us, I don't know if our conversation is not also intercepted now, because, you know, we try to destroy and not to do as my predecessor, but I cannot assure you that it will not succeed. So I suggest to the president, let's go out on the fresh air. At the beginning, many times when we arrived in Zagreb, it was demonstration against us and against the government, against the prime minister, who was receiving us and discussing cooperation with us.
Now, some Croatian prosecutors began to investigate crimes committed by members of the Croatian military against Serb civilians. Croatia's leading generals were furious.
I upravo se tu onda nalazi jedna grupa, organizirana grupa generala, koji su se istina proslavili dobrim dijelom u ratu, koji idu sa jednim političkim pamfletom u kom su napisali i plasirali ga u javnost, u kome su napisali da su oni stvarali Hrvatsku, da su oni branili Hrvatsku, obranili Hrvatsku i da će oni odlučivati o tome što će se raditi u Hrvatskoj.
Odbjeglog generala. Slučaj Gotovina stalno se isticao.
One of the leaders of these protests was General Ante Gotovina, the architect and one of the heroes of Operation Storm.
Gotovina koji je bio, mi smo bili u dobrim odnosima, on je znao da ja spadam u ovako, kako bih rekao, pismenije ljude, pa mi je to donio da ja to pročitam i da me pita što mislim o tome. Ja sam tada rekao da to neće biti dobro, da to treba, kako bih rekao, mekšati.
Dakle, to je bila jedna najava vojnog udara koji bi praktično mogli nazvati puzajući vojni udar, a on bi se mogao pretvoriti i u stvarni. I zato sam ja munjevito reagirao i sve njih poslao u mirovinu.
In 2001, Croatian prosecutors ordered the arrest of a Croatian general. veterans organized huge protests. In Split, Ivo Sanader, the new leader of Tudjman's HDZ, warned the government not to cooperate with the International Tribunal.
Ali tada ćemo svi odavde iz drugih krajeva Hrvatske poći u Zagreb, ako bude trebalo i na Jelačićev plac da im kažemo što mislimo. Nema toga naroda, dame i gospodo, koji će se odreći svojih heroja. Nema toga naroda koji će se odreći svojih junaka. A naravno da se ni hrvatski narod neće odreći najsjajnijih hrvatskih sinova.
As protests grew, Carla Del Ponte came to Zagreb. She presented a new, even more explosive indictment, demanding that the most popular Croatian general at the time be arrested and handed over to the tribunal. Ante Gotovina. Gotovina managed to escape. There was a wave of support. Books celebrated him as a romantic warrior. Biographers told of his life in the French Foreign Legion, his battles in Africa and South America, and his return to Croatia in 1991 to help his homeland. Veterans organizations also rallied to Gotovina's support.
Ja sam prijatelj i suborac od Ante Gotovine. S Antom Gotovinom sam puno prošao i u ratu, nakon rata u miru. Doista Antu Gotovinu znam kao čovjeka fantastično. Ante Gotovina je čovjek koji nikada ne bi počinio ratni zločin. Ako je Ante Gotovina u Hagu, svi mi ovdje ratni invalidi trebamo ići u Hag i cijeli hrvatski narod. Ante Gotovina je čovjek koji ne bi pticu ubio. Ovo je padobran, recimo, bez noge, ali je padobran. Nije mogao položiti za padobranca u Hrvatskoj nego u Sloveniji.
Criticizing the tribunal brought HTZ the support of veterans on the eve of elections.
Ova vlast više nije na vlasti, samo toga nije svjesna. Postoji politička snaga.
But Ivo Sanader also promised to take Croatia into the European Union. The message from the EU was unambiguous. To be treated like a normal political party, HTZ had to abandon the policies of Tudjman. Croatia had to cooperate with the tribunal. HTZ won the 2003 elections. Ivo Sanader became prime minister. This was a moment of truth.
Schauen Sie, in einem gewissen Zeitpunkt müssen Sie die Macht ergreifen, ja? Müssen Sie die Wahl gewinnen, damit Sie die Politik, die für das Land nützlich ist.
Dann machen wir.
Ja. Das ist die ganze Weisheit.
With his majority in parliament, Ivo Sanader made EU integration the top priority of his new government. For this, he radically changed his party's previous policies.
One was Europe. They were against, now they were in favor. The other was cooperation with the Hague Tribunal. They were against, now they were cooperating. And three was the attitude, and at the beginning it was to a large extent the symbolic attitude towards the minorities, or as in Croatia, always the test minorities, the Serbs. This was very dramatic. Not only did he symbolically turned around completely 180 degrees their position towards the Serb minority, they even formed a coalition in parliament. Without that, we couldn't have advanced on, or we couldn't have made progress on this road towards Europe, and in particular, we couldn't have made progress towards these reforms that we have undertaken in the meantime.
Politically, the European Union was involved by us, and they put a great pressure on Croatia. You know, Croatia was acting to be member of the European Union, and each step they were they want to have. We run to Brussels, they stop. If Gotovina is not arrested, they cannot, the SIA, all these steps to be at the door of the European Union.
Sanader danas rekao samo da je jučerašnji razgovor bio otvoren.
Under pressure from Carla Del Ponte, Ivo Sanader made finding Gotovina a priority for his government.
Also es gibt dieses Verfassungsgesetz, das uns verpflichtet zur Zusammenarbeit mit dem Haager Tribunal. Sprich, jeder, der angeklagt ist, muss vor dem Gericht erscheinen. Und das war nichts als einfach das Respektieren dieses Gesetzes. Und ich habe das der Partei gesagt, wenn jemand angeklagt wird, der muss vor dem Gericht erscheinen.
Na nas je vršen jaki pritisak upravo sa strane Carle Del Ponte, jer je ona vjerovala da mi znamo gdje je general Gotovina. Ona je nam rekla, ako mi osobno ne znamo, ali određeni mehanizmi u Hrvatskoj ili predstavnici određenih mehanizama znaju gdje je Gotovina. A mi smo tvrdili da imamo informacije obavještajnih službi da on u Hrvatskoj nije i da je on otišao izvan granica Hrvatske. Unatoč toga ona je bila vrlo žestoka.
With Gotovina on the run, Croatia remained blocked. Then, in September 2005, there was a breakthrough.
We were able to locate him thanks telephone control that the prosecutor for Croatia put on the wife of Gotovina. Even if they change, each time they change the cellular, each time they after one phone call they change the cellular, so we could never locate him. But one time the wife make an error, she used twice the same cellular for a second telephone call.
In December 2005, Ante Gotovina was arrested in a restaurant on the Canary Islands in Spain.
So it was a political act for Sanader to allow the arrest of Gotovina. But he, personally, he was always thinking Gotovina is innocent. And he told me that each time.
Trebalo je dati građanima samo mogućnost da razmisle. Ja sam njih pozivao u stvari da misle. I upravo mislim da sam u tome pogodio. Jer gledajte, kada je uhapšen jedan general, Norac, koji je zaslužan u ratu, ali on je trebao odgovarati za neka konkretna ubojstva. I kada je on uhapšen, ja ne znam koliko, ali 100.000 valjda ljudi se našlo u protestnom jednom mitingu u Splitu. 100.000 ljudi. Kada je Norac osuđen, a suđenje je bilo dostupno svima, dakle javnost je bila upoznata zašto se njega tereti, onda je 100-200 ljudi došlo protestirati. Mi se moramo boriti za principe. I ako se borimo za principe, građani to prije ili kasnije shvate.
Now Croatia started EU accession talks. In The Hague, the Gotovina trial began. Memories of the war still weigh heavily on many Croatian families. The author, Ivana Bodrožić, wrote about her childhood and the killing of her father in Vukovar in 1991 in her novel Hotel Zagorje.
Dakle, to je roman koji govori o djevojčici. Pratimo, znači, čitavu radnju iz njezine perspektive. Ona ima 9 godina kad u Vukovaru počinje rat. Tada odlazi na more zajedno s bratom. Međutim, situacija u gradu postaje sve ozbiljnija i ona se više nikada u grad ne vrati. u razdoblju dok traje rat. Ja se sjećam, počeli su jednom u Vukovaru pojavljivati ti neki četnici s bradama, hodati po gradu. To su bile neke zastrašujuće scene. Oni su jedanput došli i rekli kao, gubite se odavde, mi ćemo osloboditi Vukovar. Mislim, od koga? Živiš tu cijeli život i sad te neko uvjerava da on treba osloboditi taj grad od tebe. I nekako je najprirodniji, neka reakcija je bila, pa ne, ja ne želim otići odavde, tu sam stvorio svoj život. Ja do tada nisam bila baš sigurna što sam ja. Dakle, kod nas u obitelji nije postavljalo to pitanje. Moji roditelji su imali prijatelje Srbe, Bošnjake, muslimane. Tako da, ali kad razmišljam o tome da bih živjela tamo i odgajala svoju djecu, to mi je nekako nezamislivo. Upravo zbog te atmosfere koja danas vlada u tom gradu.
November 2011. It's the 20th anniversary of the fall of Vukovar to Serbian troops in 1991. At the time, the city was almost completely destroyed. Every year, people come here to commemorate the victims. Vukovar saw one of the worst massacres in former Yugoslavia. The relatives of those who died visit a memorial outside the city. Among those who lost their loved ones is the radio moderator Zvezdana Polovina.
Moj muž Branimir radio je na Hrvatskom radiju Vukovar, isto kao i ja. Grad je pao 18.11. Danas je 20.11. Znači, točno je prošlo 20 godina od njegova ubojstva na Ovčari. Kad je grad pao 18.11. zatekli smo se u skloništu Vučedolske kapljice, nekih 300 metara od Vukovarske bolnice. Nekako smo mislili da će nam bolnica biti najsigurnije utočište, pa smo se sklonili u bolnicu.
Kompletna bolnica funkcionira.
19.11. su već počeli u bolnicu ulaziti Jugoslavenska narodna armija i srpske paravojne formacije i počeli su odvoditi neke ljude. Mi smo izašli na zadnji izlaz bolnice. Na vratima je stajao major Veselin Šljivančanin i zapovjedao da moramo mi žene stati na desnu stranu, a muškarci na lijevu stranu. Tad sam zadnji put vidjela svog muža. Mi smo još neko vrijeme stajali u dvorištu bolnice, nekih možda 10-ak metara udaljeni jedni od drugih, znači muškarci na ljevoj strani, mi žene na desnoj. Gledali smo se, pitali smo, žene su pitale Šljivančanina kud odvode muškarce, šta će s njima biti. On je rekao da idu samo na kraće ispitivanje u kasarnu i da će oni isto tako za nama krenut konvojem.
His body was found 6 years later in a mass grave outside Vukovar.
Da, svjedočila sam u Hagu. Mislim da apsolutne pravde nema. Mi naše mrtve ne možemo vratiti. I mislim da bi, znam sad ovo što ću reći, da je to utopijsko razmišljanje, ali pravda bi bila postignuta onda kad bi ti ljudi koji su činili zlodjela prošli sve isto ono što smo mi prošli.
Veselin Šljivančanin In accordance with the scheduling order,
Veselin Šljevančanin was arrested in Belgrade in 2003. He stood trial in The Hague and was sentenced.
And murder of more than 190
In July 2011, Šljevančanin was released early. He had served less than 7 years. Today, both Serbs and Croats live in Vukovar again. Relations are not always easy. Srđan Antić is a Croatian Serb from Vukovar. He works on reconciliation projects in his traumatized hometown.
Well, today, as a direct consequence of the war, in this city there is two ghettoized communities which are living side by side. This situation is completely unnatural for Vukovar, comparing the experience of the people through the centuries. Vukovar in the past was a crossroad and economic center for all the region. Extremely rich comparing the soil and agriculture production. Now agriculture is very bad position. It's not competitive comparing the production in development countries. Employment rate is the highest in Croatia, and relation between two ethnic groups, the biggest ethnic group, Serbs and the Croats, is organized in a way that there is actually two ghettos which cannot provide progress for this society. Everything what you're doing in Vukovar, it's connected and based on your ethnic background. If you decide to go in a cafe, you will go to Serbian or Croatian cafe, depending about your ethnic background. Even these cafes are not marked. We locals, we know which cafe is a Serbian, which cafe is a Croatian. And fortunately, in the last few days, we have some spaces which we can call it as a neutral. Depending of the owner, that is actually remark, is it Croatian or Serbian cafe? We have different projects which are also facing with the facts, with the facing with the history. Based on that, we're collecting different type of the positive example of cooperation between ethnic groups which have happened during the war, open conflict, and after, as a proof that people are here just normal people as other people are who live in, I don't know, anywhere in Europe.
Jednako kao što ja sama dugo vremena nisam bila spremna čuti neke stvari koje su se događale u Hrvatskoj ljudima srpske nacionalnosti. Ne zato što ja mislim da sam ja pokvarena i loša osoba, nego zato što tebe tvoja trauma do te mjere ispuni. Da ti osjećaš takav nekakav pravednički gnjev, da ti zapravo nije briga. Međutim, da bi ti, ja mislim, počeo nekako zdravo i normalno živjeti u nekom društvu, ti jednostavno moraš prihvatiti i to, moraš jednostavno poslušati i drugu stranu.
With Ante Gotovina on trial in The Hague, the path was open for Croatia to join all Western institutions. Relations with the US improved. Croatia was invited to join NATO. European governments embraced Ivo Sanader. In its EU negotiations, Croatia made rapid progress. Now new issues rose to the top of the agenda. One was corruption.
The general atmosphere was, what they will do is they will catch small fry, but the big fish will never be caught or charged with anything, and this is our problem. I know some friends of mine who are keen followers of Croatia who were fighting with me over that and saying there's no way that you will ever be able to address corruption in the really high places, let alone charge Sanader with anything, or even attempt to charge Sanader with anything.
In 2009, Ivo Sanader surprised everyone when he suddenly resigned as Prime Minister. A few months later, he was charged with corruption. He denied all charges. Other politicians were also charged with corruption. Ministers, managers of state companies. In the end, the governing party HDZ itself.
This is actually a period of cleansing, and maybe a number of other countries should have gone through this, or if you had the same process in some other countries, similar things would come out. And this is the only way for us to sort of resurface at the other end with the possibility for a clean start.
In 2010, the Croats elected a new president, the Social Democrat Ivo Josipović. As president, Josipović undertook a historic trip to Ahmići, a village in central Bosnia. Here, Bosnian Croat troops had killed 118 Bosniak civilians in April 1993. In Ahmići, Josipović apologized for the role played by Tudjman's Croatia in the 1990s.
Naravno da je odlazak u Ahmiće bio i za mene izazov i nisam unaprijed znao kako će to završiti. Imao sam kontakt sa ljudima koji su izgubili i nekoliko članova obitelji i u njihovim očima sam vidio da su sretni što se taj događaj zbio, što je predsjednik Hrvatske došao tamo, poklonio se žrtvama. Isto tako mi je bilo iznimno drago da sam u razgovoru sa Hrvatima vidio da i oni cijene taj potez i da na neki način vide mogućnost da se dogodi takav posjet, da su u njemu prepoznali mogućnost da sutra normalno zajedno žive.
In war crimes trials in The Hague, a number of Bosnian Croats were found guilty for the massacre in Ahmići. Then, in April 2011, all eyes turned to The Hague for the first instance judgment in the trial of Ante Gotovina.
Mr. Gotovina, will you please stand? For the reasons summarized above, this chamber, having considered all of the evidence and the arguments of the parties, the statute and the rules, and based upon the factual and legal findings as determined in the judgment, finds you guilty as a member of a joint criminal enterprise of the following charges. Count 1, persecution as a crime against humanity. Count 2, deportation as a crime against humanity. Count 4, plunder of public and private property as a violation of the laws or customs of war. Count 5, wanton destruction as a violation of the laws or customs of war. Count 6, murder as a crime against humanity. For having committed these crimes, the chamber sentences you, Mr. Gotovina, to a single sentence of 24 years of imprisonment.
Kada je bila čitanje prve presude generalu Gotovine, ovdje je bilo 50 ratnih vojnih invalida i gledali smo zajedno televiziju. Čovjek u kolicima, glasogovornik Vide grada Zagreba, Miroslav Tesla je plakao. Čovjek znači koji je 100% ratni invalid. Možete misliti kako smo se mi osjećali. Nažalost, Republika Hrvatska je mala zemlja i plaća nepravednu cijenu.
What next generation will say about this kind of cooperation with Carla Del Ponte and with those other crooks in Hague after cooperation in Gotovina case? For example, I hope we'll not have war anymore, but tomorrow, what is the message if Gotovina will sentence for I don't know how many years in Hague. What is the message for next warriors in some possible next war?
We receive a mandate from the Security Council, so high responsible, political and military responsible for war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide during the Balkan War. Of course, if you are looking now what happened around the world, you see that in many other countries, big countries even, you have that the commission of that kind of crimes, and nobody's investigating. It's not investigating because it's no jurisdiction, because it's no possibility to investigate, and even because nobody will have the possibility to investigate.
Točno je, Hrvatska je bila žrtva agresije, Hrvatska je zemlja koja se oslobodila, koja je vodila legitiman, pravedan i obrambeni rat, ali koja je polako postala svjesna da tijekom tog obrambenog rata i pripadnici njenih vojnih formacija nisu uvijek postupali u skladu sa standardima međunarodnog prava. U prvom redu, naravno, Haški sud je bio taj koji je na neki način pomogao da se na jedan realističan način baci pogled na našu prošlost, da se postavi pitanje odgovornosti.
Franjo Tudjman, Croatia's first president, was never put on trial. However, separate judgments of the International Court referred to his central role in criminal conspiracies in both Bosnia and in Operation Storm.
For me, the days of Tudjman was not good because all the work, of course, we use that, some of the evidence can use in other trials, but of course Tudjman should be also in court.
In early 2012, there was a campaign for the referendum on EU accession. All the big veterans associations supported joining the EU, but some veterans remained bitter and opposed.
Kaže, branitelji nisu proljevali krv za EU. I nismo, nego nam je EU udarila embargo da se ne možemo naoružavati, da se ne možemo braniti svoj narod, jel? Mi znamo da jednostavno će hrvatski narod nestati i hrvatska država isto tako ako uđemo u Europsku uniju. Znamo da svi pikiraju na recimo Italijani na otoke, Mađari tamo malo na svoje, Slovenci na svoje, svako nešto svoje pikira, Srbi znamo da pikiraju, jel? Znači jednostavno ulaskom u Europsku uniju mislimo da bi Hrvatska nestala i isto tako kad bi naselili puno stranaca, nas je jako malo ovdje, jel? Jednostavno izgubio bi se hrvatski narod, a to je nedopustivo.
One day before the referendum, some opponents of EU accession gathered on the main square in Zagreb. Their aim was to tear down the European flag.
Overall, I would say that the European Union acted as a catalyst for social and political and economic change in Croatia, and it was very good because it created the possibilities for a sandwich pressing upon our power holders. The European Union from the high end, the public opinion, the media, the press, the civil society from below.
Sunday is the big day for Croatia.
Well, yes, Sunday is the day of the decision, the day of decision, of the big decision, and I hope that Croatian citizens will choose the right side.
Našli smo se zajedno, cijeli državni vrh se našao u Saboru i mi smo tamo pratili rezultate. Ja osobno nisam imao nikakvih sumnji u to kakav će biti rezultat. Mislim da je ipak konačno pozitivni rezultat je viđen, 66% naših građana je bilo za Europsku uniju, da je bio racionalna odluka većine građana, što pretpostavlja naravno i većinsko prihvaćanje vrijednosti Europske unije, ne samo Europske unije, nego i suvremenog hrvatskog društva.
In December 2011, Croatia's EU accession was put to the vote in the European Parliament. There was overwhelming support. 88% of members from across all of Europe and from all political parties voted for Croatia to become the next EU member.
Mislim da Hrvatska upravo i zbog ratnog iskustva koje ima i zbog svojeg specifičnog multikulturalizma koje se nužno razvija iz činjenice da imamo velik broj nacionalnih manjina i s kojima, u pogledu kojih smo vrlo specifično, rekao bih, dobro uredili odnose. Dakle, Hrvatska može biti određeni novi duh multikulturalizma u Europi.
One of the many Croatian Serbs who returned to Croatia after 2000 is the Hollywood actor Rade Šerbedžija. Today he directs an international theatre festival on the island of Brijuni.
I felt like Odysseus, like Ulix, who is coming back home after exactly 12 years. Things are much, much, much better. I can feel it, you know. Walking again through these streets, which were some days and years forbidden for me to walk through them. Going to these restaurants again, meeting people. People are hugging me. I'm again popular actor there.
Dodajte mi Harnu. O, kako sam usamljena i bez prijatelja. U očima ti vidim da me mrziš.
Actually, I love the most in whole theater experience. I like the most my experience with working with young people.
Ajde, molim te, ti možeš napraviti, jel možeš pitati mamu ili...
I started to work with young actors as a professor of acting. And I did few professional productions with them. And I remember it was the best time ever, because they are young. They are ready to stay for hours and hours, you know, working, rehearsing, you know. That was really fantastic.
Daje jednu neposrednost tih njihovih odnosa. To nešto djetinjsko, djetinje. I was born in Croatia, and Croatia is my country, actually. If I'm thinking about this, you know, my mentality, even I'm Serb from Croatia, Serbian from Croatia, but Croatia is my country.